You've probably already seen the discourse swirling around this week, the hallucination debates, the AI safety arguments that somehow keep getting both more dramatic and more circular, the quiet horror story out of Nairobi that got buried under all the hype. There's a lot happening, and if you've been trying to keep up, you might feel like you're drinking from a fire hose that's also on fire. So let me slow it down a bit, because when I looked at everything landing in my feeds this week, I noticed something underneath it all. A single, uncomfortable question kept surfacing. We've built something extraordinary, and we have almost no idea what to do with it. That's the thread running through everything today. Not, is AI powerful? We're past that. The question now is, powerful in whose hands, toward what ends, understood how, and by whom? Let's get into it. Start with something deceptively simple. The word hallucination. You've heard it 1,000 times by now. AI hallucinates, meaning it confidently makes stuff up. But there's a piece going around arguing that we should interrogate that word a lot more carefully, and honestly, the argument lands. Hallucination is a term borrowed from human psychology. When a person hallucinates, they perceive something that isn't there, but crucially, we understand that as a malfunction. The brain is doing something it shouldn't. The implication when we apply that word to AI is similar: the model is malfunctioning. It was supposed to tell the truth and it didn't. But here's the problem with that framing. These models were never designed to tell the truth in the way a database tells the truth, or the way a calculator tells the truth. They were designed to produce fluent, contextually plausible text by predicting what token comes next. Truth, in the strict correspondence to reality sense, was never the primary optimization target. So when a model generates something false with great confidence, calling it a hallucination lets the architecture off the hook. It makes the failure sound accidental, biological, almost sympathetic, when really it's a predictable output of a system that wasn't built to know the difference between true and false in the first place. Andrej Karpathy popularized the term vibe coding, the practice of just sort of guiding an AI through a coding task without really engaging with the underlying code yourself. You vibe until the thing works. It's a brilliant phrase because it captures something real about the experience. But hallucination might be doing the opposite, obscuring something real by making it feel familiar. If we called these outputs confident confabulations or plausible fabrications, it would force us to confront the architecture, not just the output. Language shapes what we think we need to fix. And speaking of what we need to fix, or what we don't know how to fix, the AI safety conversation this week was something. There's a piece arguing that we're massively overcomplicating the risk arguments, and another saying the real problem with AI safety isn't that we lack knowledge or technical capability, it's that we lack the wanting. The will. The genuine, deep, institutional desire to actually solve it rather than signal solve it. And then there's a third piece looking at all the AI 2027 discourse, the wave of takes about what happens when superintelligence arrives in roughly 18 months give or take, and essentially saying, what we need is more commentary on the commentary. Which is either meta-brilliance or a sign that the discourse has fully eaten itself. Let me try to pull something useful out of all three of those, because together they tell a coherent story. The overcomplication piece is using a useful thought experiment. Imagine aliens arrive, they're vastly more intelligent than us, what do we do? And the argument is that people tie themselves in knots with edge cases and philosophical caveats when the core risk is actually pretty legible if you're willing to look at it plainly. Superintelligence systems pursuing goals misaligned with human values is dangerous. You don't need 100 layers of decision theory to see that. The complication is sometimes a way of avoiding the conclusion. But then the wanting piece flips it. It's not that the arguments are too complicated. It's that even the people who understand them clearly often don't act like they believe them. There's a kind of safety washing happening, labs that publish alignment research while also racing to ship the most capable models possible. Governments that commission AI safety boards and then largely ignore their findings. The problem isn't epistemic. It's motivational. Nobody is truly pumping the brakes, because nobody wants to be the one who pumped the brakes and lost. That's a collective action problem, not a philosophy problem. And the 2027 discourse piece captures the absurdity of what happens when those two dynamics collide. You get an ecosystem of takes, counter-takes, and takes about takes, all of which are technically engaging with the question while functionally amounting to a very elaborate way of not doing anything. Which is its own kind of answer, I suppose. The sophistication of the conversation is part of what makes it safe for the participants, not for the rest of us. Now here's where the story gets darker and more concrete. While all of this very sophisticated discourse is happening, there are human beings sitting in a stuffy hotel room in Nairobi whose entire job is to watch what users see through Meta's AI smart glasses. In real time. Without those users knowing. The reporting here is from Swedish journalists, and the worker they interviewed was visibly scared. He could lose his job just for talking to them. His work involves viewing the live camera feed from people wearing Meta's Ray-Ban smart glasses, sometimes footage of homes, faces, private moments, so that he and his colleagues can label and annotate it for training data. Low-wage contractors in Kenya, watching what American and European consumers think is just their AI assistant passively observing the world. This is not hypothetical. This is the infrastructure underneath the glossy product. And it connects directly to the hallucination conversation. Because one of the things these workers are doing, one of the things the entire data labeling industry does, is teaching models what's true. What's appropriate. What a good response looks like. The intelligence of these systems is, in significant part, the laundered judgment of workers who are paid very little, protected very little, and known about almost not at all. There's something almost structurally dishonest about how this gets presented. Meta's smart glasses are marketed as a seamless AI experience. The word seamless is doing a lot of heavy lifting there. What seamless means, in practice, is that the seams are hidden and the seams are people. This connects directly to the product market fit question, which has been simmering underneath AI discourse for a while now and finally boiled over this week with a sharp observation from Benedict Evans. He put it plainly, if people are only using these AI tools a couple of times a week, and can't think of anything to use them for on an average day, then the technology hasn't changed their life. OpenAI itself talks about a capability gap, the distance between what the models can do and what people actually do with them. Evans reads that as a polite way of saying they don't have clear product market fit. And I think he's right, but I want to push on it a little, because the framing of capability gap is interesting in itself. It implies the problem is on the user side, people just haven't figured out enough use cases yet. But what if the problem is something more fundamental? What if the capabilities we've built are impressive in demos and in narrow professional contexts, but genuinely don't map well to the texture of most people's actual days? You don't need a reasoning engine to figure out what to cook for dinner. You don't need multimodal intelligence to book a haircut. The use cases where AI is genuinely transformative, complex research synthesis, legal document review, code generation at scale are real, but they're not universal. And building a $100 billion consumer business on use cases that apply deeply to maybe 20% of people is a different proposition than it looks. The enterprise bet makes sense given that backdrop. But it also means the story about AI changing everyone's life, the story that justified the valuations and the breathless coverage, that story has some explaining to do. Which brings me, in a sideways kind of way, to the programming language question. There's a genuinely fascinating piece this week from Armin Ronasher, the person behind Flask and a bunch of other foundational Python tooling, arguing that we're going to see a wave of new programming languages designed specifically for agentic systems. His initial intuition was that the enormous corpus of existing code would cement existing languages in place. Python, JavaScript, Rust, too much has been written in them, too much AI has been trained on them, for anything new to break through. But he's changed his mind. The argument now is roughly this: agents don't just execute code, they reason about code, they generate code, they compose tools dynamically. And the languages we've built, with their idiosyncrasies, their legacy warts, their design decisions made for human programmers, may not be optimal for that. A language designed from the ground up for agent-native programming might be cleaner, more formally verifiable, more amenable to reasoning about by the models themselves. The gap isn't in the model capabilities. It's in the substrate. This pairs interestingly with the piece about Pi, the minimal agent architecture inside something called OpenClaw, which went viral this week under a few different names. Claudebot, Moltbot, apparently the naming situation was chaotic. But what's interesting about Pi isn't the viral moment, it's the design philosophy. It's trying to make the agent layer as thin and principled as possible. Not a feature-bloated platform but a minimal, inspectable structure that you can reason about clearly. Which is exactly the instinct you'd want to see from people building agentic systems right now, given how much of the agent landscape is currently bolt a model onto a tool calling loop and hope for the best. The minimal agent idea and the new programming language idea are pointing at the same underlying need: legibility. We need systems that humans can actually understand, inspect, and reason about. Not because we're Luddites, but because if we can't understand what these systems are doing at a structural level, we're flying blind, and flying blind is precisely the dynamic that the safety discourse is supposedly worried about, even as the safety discourse itself sometimes seems to be flying blind in its own way. So here's the through line I keep coming back to. We have genuinely powerful technology. We don't fully understand what it's doing internally. We're marketing it with language hallucination, seamless, capability gap that obscures as much as it reveals. The people who think hardest about the risks are caught in discourse loops. The people who build the systems are shipping fast and hoping the legibility problems get solved later. The workers who actually make the system smart are invisible. And the users, by and large, are still figuring out whether any of this actually fits into their lives. That's not a doom story. It's actually a clarifying one. The problem isn't that we built something too powerful to handle. The problem is that we built something genuinely extraordinary and we're still using 20th century habits of mind to think about it commercially, philosophically, linguistically, institutionally. The technology moved. The thinking is catching up. The good news? Catching up is possible. The fact that we're arguing about the word hallucination and who's watching through the smart glasses and whether the safety discourse has eaten itself, that's all part of the catching up. Uncomfortable, sometimes embarrassing, often circular, but real. And on that note, I'll leave you with this: somewhere in Nairobi, a person is watching someone's living room through a pair of stylish glasses so that a model can eventually learn to describe what it sees more accurately. Somewhere in San Francisco, a product manager is asking why only 11% of users come back more than twice a week. And somewhere in a GitHub repository, someone is writing a new programming language that no one has heard of yet. That might be the thing we actually needed all along. The future of AI isn't a single dramatic event. It's 1,000 quiet reckonings happening simultaneously in hotel rooms and product meetings and code reviews. We just have to actually want to look. Anyway, if the AI that eventually reads this script hallucinates a better ending, please send it to me. I could use the competition.